The pregnancy test trembled in Marlowe's hands like a fragile promise she wasn't sure she could keep. Two pink lines stared back at her in the cramped bathroom of her studio apartment, the fluorescent light above flickering with the same uncertainty that now gripped her chest. She set the test on the chipped porcelain sink and gripped the edges, her knuckles white against her pale skin. "This can't be happening," she whispered to her reflection, her green eyes wide with disbelief. But it was. 3 tests later, the reality remained unchanged. At 26, Marlo Grace Sinclair was pregnant, alone, and terrified. She thought about calling him Devin, the guy she'd been casually seeing for 2 months. Nothing serious. They'd both agreed. Just 2 people finding comfort in each other's company after long shifts at the hospital where they'd met. He was a traveling nurse, always talking about his next assignment, his next adventure. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from her supervisor at the community clinic. "Need to see you first thing Monday." Important. Marlowe's stomach dropped. Budget cuts had been looming for weeks, and she'd seen the way Dr. Martinez avoided eye contact during their last staff meeting. She pressed her palms against her still flat belly, as if she could somehow protect the tiny life growing inside from the storm clouds gathering around them. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in with each shallow breath she took. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "When life knocks you down, honey, you get back up and show it what you're made of." Easy words from a woman who'd raised her alone in rural South Carolina, working double shifts at a diner to keep food on their table. Marlo had inherited more than her mother's stubborn streak. She'd inherited her fierce protection of those she loved. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach again. She needed air. Stepping onto the small balcony of her second-floor apartment, she watched the evening traffic crawl through downtown Charlotte. People heading home to families, to dinner tables, to lives that made sense. She envied them their certainty. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Devin's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, beautiful." His voice was warm, familiar. "You free tonight? I'm leaving for Atlanta tomorrow. Thought we could grab dinner." Marlo closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the words she needed to say. "Devin, we need to talk. Can you come over? Everything okay? You sound weird. Just, please come over." 30 minutes later, he stood in her doorway with takeout Chinese food and that easy smile that had first caught her attention. Tall, sandy-haired, with laugh lines that spoke of a man who didn't take life too seriously. They sat on her small couch, the untouched food growing cold on the coffee table between them. Marlo twisted her hands in her lap, searching for the right words. "I'm pregnant," she finally said, the words falling between them like stones into still water. Devin's smile faded slowly, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. "What?" "I'm pregnant. About 6 weeks, I think." He set down his food, leaning back against the couch cushions. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. "Devin, He ran his hands through his hair. "Marlo, we talked about this. We agreed we weren't looking for anything serious." "I know, but I'm leaving for Atlanta tomorrow. Then Portland after that. I can't. This isn't what I signed up for." The words hit her like physical blows. She'd expected surprise, maybe fear, but not this cold dismissal. "I'm not asking you to sign up for anything," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "I'm just telling you because you have a right to know." Devin stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. Because there are options, you know. You don't have to." "Don't." Marlo's voice cut through his words like ice. "Don't tell me what I have to do." He turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never noticed before, a fundamental inability to see beyond his own needs. "This is crazy, Marlo. You barely know me." "I know enough," she whispered, understanding now that she'd been right about that much. Devin grabbed his jacket from the chair, avoiding her gaze. "I'm sorry. I really am. But I can't be what you need." The door closed behind him with a quiet click that somehow sounded louder than if he'd slammed it. Marlo sat alone in the silence, her hand pressed against her stomach, and realized that for the first time in her life, she truly understood what it meant to be brave. And in that moment, she knew she'd have to be braver than she'd ever imagined. Monday morning came like a slap of cold reality across Marlo's face. She stood outside Dr. Martinez's office at the community clinic, her hands trembling as she smoothed down her scrubs. The hallway smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams. She'd grown to recognize that scent over the past few weeks, as budget meetings became more frequent and staff members started avoiding each other's eyes. "Come in, Marlo." Dr. Martinez's voice was softer than usual, which somehow made everything worse. She entered the cramped office, noting how he couldn't quite meet her gaze as she sat across from his cluttered desk. Behind him, certificates and thank you cards from grateful patients covered the wall, a testament to the good they'd done in this forgotten corner of Charlotte. "I'm going to cut straight to the point," he began, his weathered hands folded tightly. "The county pulled our funding. We're closing the clinic at the end of the month." The words hit her like a physical blow, even though she'd been expecting them. Marlo pressed her lips together, fighting the urge to touch her stomach. 8 weeks pregnant, unemployed, and abandoned. The trifecta of disasters she'd never imagined facing all at once. "I've written you a glowing recommendation," Dr. Martinez continued, sliding an envelope across the desk. "And I've already made some calls. Presbyterian Hospital is hiring, but they want experienced nurses, not community clinic workers," she finished quietly. He nodded, the guilt evident in his tired eyes. "I'm sorry, Marlo. You're one of the best nurses I've ever worked with. This isn't about your performance." Walking to her car 20 minutes later, Marlo felt like she was moving through thick fog. The parking lot seemed endless, each step heavier than the last. She sat behind the wheel of her aging Honda Civic, staring at the clinic's front door where a "closing soon" sign now hung like a death certificate. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother in South Carolina. "How's my baby girl doing? Haven't heard from you in a while." A bitter laugh escaped Marlo's throat. If only her mother knew just how much of a baby girl she was about to become a grandmother to. She drove home in a daze, the afternoon traffic blurring past her window. Her apartment felt different now, smaller, shabbier, more temporary. Every unpaid bill on her kitchen counter seemed to mock her. Rent, utilities, car payment, student loans. The numbers swirled in her head like a mathematical nightmare. That evening, she found herself scrolling through job listings on her laptop, each posting more discouraging than the last. Minimum 2 years hospital experience required. Bachelor's degree preferred. References from previous supervisors necessary. She had the degree, barely. She had the experience, but from a clinic that was closing, and her most recent supervisor was probably crying into his own unemployment forms. Around midnight, when desperation had officially set in, she stumbled across something different. A posting on a caregiving website, buried between ads for elderly companionship and physical therapy assistance. Private caregiver needed for adult male. Night shift. Medical background preferred. Competitive compensation. Serious inquiries only. Must be comfortable with difficult personality. Located in mountain area outside Denver, Colorado. 1,000 miles from her problems, from Devon's ghost, from her mother's worried phone calls. The pay listed was almost double what she'd been making at the clinic. Her finger hovered over the unapply button for a long moment. What did she know about Colorado? Mountains, snow, clean air. It sounded like the opposite of everything falling apart in her life. Before she could second-guess herself, she clicked. The application was surprisingly simple. Name, qualifications, availability. At the bottom, a single question. "Why are you interested in this position?" Marlo stared at the blank text box for several minutes before typing, "I need a fresh start, and I'm not afraid of difficult people. Sometimes the hardest cases need the most care." She hit submit before she could change her mind. 3 days later, her phone rang while she was packing up her few belongings from the clinic. An unknown Colorado number. "Miss Sinclair, this is Jean Wallace. I understand you applied for a caregiving position." The voice was deep, measured, with the kind of authority that came from years of taking charge of difficult situations. "Yes, sir, I did. Can you be here by next Friday? We'll cover your travel expenses." Marlo looked around the empty clinic break room, at the faded motivational posters and the coffee pot that had never quite worked right. Her old life was already boxed up and forgotten. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "I can be there." "Good. Fair warning, Mrs. Sinclair. My employer isn't easy to work with. He's been through 6 caregivers in the past year. What happened to them?" A pause. "They quit." After Jean hung up, Marlo sat in her car in the clinic parking lot for the last time, one hand resting on her barely there bump. She was about to drive across the country to care for a stranger who apparently terrorized his employees, while carrying a baby whose father had abandoned them both. And somehow, for the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. "Well, little one," she whispered to her stomach, "looks like we're going on an adventure." The mountain road seemed to wind endlessly upward, each curve revealing nothing but more pine trees and the promise of thin air that made Marlowe's chest tighten. She'd been driving for 2 days, stopping only at roadside motels where the shower water ran lukewarm and the walls were paper-thin. Her Honda Civic groaned with each mile, loaded down with everything she owned, which wasn't much. A few boxes of clothes, her nursing supplies, and a small suitcase that held her mother's quilt and the only photo she had of her father. The GPS announced she was 5 miles from her destination, but all she could see were towering evergreens and glimpses of snow-capped peaks through the windshield. The elevation change was making her queasy, though she couldn't tell if it was the altitude or the pregnancy. At 10 weeks now, morning sickness had become an all-day companion. Finally, she spotted it, a pair of imposing iron gates set into stone pillars. No name, no number, just an intercom system that looked like it could withstand a military assault. She pressed the button and waited. "State your business." The voice was curt, professional. "Marlowe Sinclair. I'm the new caregiver." The gates swung open silently, revealing a private road that curved through what looked like untouched wilderness. After another mile, the trees parted to reveal a house that made her breath catch in her throat. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress, modern and imposing, built from dark stone and glass. It seemed to grow from the mountainside itself. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the surrounding forest, making the structure appear both part of the landscape and completely separate from it. She parked near the front entrance, her beat-up Honda looking absurdly out of place against the backdrop of architectural perfection. Before she could gather her courage to knock, the front door opened. A man emerged, African-American, shorter than she'd expected from his voice, with silver-gray hair cropped close and shoulders that spoke of military discipline. His dark eyes assessed her with the thoroughness of someone accustomed to evaluating potential threats. "Ms. Sinclair, I'm Gene Wallace." He extended a hand, his grip firm and brief. "You made good time. The GPS got me lost twice, but I'm here." She gestured toward her car. "Should I bring my things in?" "Leave them for now. Mr. Knox wants to meet you first." Something in his tone made her stomach clench. "And if the meeting doesn't go well?" Gene's expression didn't change. "And then you'll be back on the road within the hour." He led her through an entryway that could have graced a luxury hotel, polished marble floors, a staircase that curved upward like a work of art, and abstract paintings that probably cost more than she'd earned in the past year. Everything was pristine, cold, and utterly silent. "A few ground rules before we go in," Gene said, stopping outside a set of double doors. "Mr. Knox doesn't like to be touched without permission. He doesn't appreciate small talk or false sympathy, and he has no patience for people who treat him like he's broken." "Understood." The last caregiver lasted 3 days. The one before that made it 2 weeks before she quit crying in the middle of the night shift. Marlowe straightened her shoulders. "I don't cry easily." Something that might have been approval flickered across Gene's face. "I will see." He knocked twice on the doors, waited for a response that didn't come, then opened them anyway. The room beyond was a study in contradictions. Massive windows that showcased the mountain view, yet curtains drawn to block most of the light. Expensive furniture arranged with military precision, but no personal touches anywhere. And there, behind a desk that could have served as a landing pad, sat the man she'd traveled 2,000 miles to care for. Thaddeus Knox was nothing like she'd imagined. Even seated, she could tell he was tall, probably 6'3" or 6'4" before the accident. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his face clean-shaven and sharp-featured in a way that belonged in boardrooms or magazine covers. He wore a white dress shirt and dark slacks, every detail immaculate except for the wheelchair that he clearly resented. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. Dark brown, almost black, and filled with a pain so deep it seemed to have its own gravity. They fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she held his gaze. "So you're the latest sacrifice," he said, his voice carrying a slight southern accent that he'd clearly tried to suppress. "Gene, she looks like she's barely out of high school." "I'm 26, Marlowe said before Gene could respond, "and I've been working as a nurse for 4 years." Thaddeus leaned back in his chair, studying her with the cold calculation of someone who'd learned to spot weakness from a distance. Community clinic, according to your application. Not exactly intensive care experience. No, but I've worked with difficult patients before. Difficult? A humorless smile touched his lips. Is that what Jean told you I was? Among other things. His eyebrows rose slightly. Such as? Marlowe felt Jean's warning glance. But something in Thaddeus's manner, the way he seemed to be testing her, pushing to see where she'd break, made her straighten her spine. Rude, demanding. Someone who goes through caregivers like tissues because you'd rather be miserable than let someone help you. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Jean cleared his throat softly, a sound that might have been a warning or a prayer. Finally, Thaddeus laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. At least you're honest. Most of them come in here with their nurturing smiles and their determination to fix me. I'm not here to fix you, Marlowe said quietly. I'm here to do a job. And what job is that exactly? Whatever you need me to do, within reason. Within reason. He repeated the words as if they tasted bitter. And what if what I need is to be left alone? Then I'll leave you alone, but I'll still be here if you change your mind. For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Then he turned to Jean. Show her to the guest wing. We'll try this for a week. As they left the study, Marlowe caught a glimpse of Thaddeus through the closing door. He was staring out the window at the mountains, his shoulders set in a line that spoke of decades of carrying weight no one else could see. That went better than expected, Jean murmured, as they walked down a hallway lined with more expensive art. How could you tell? He didn't ask you to leave immediately. As Jean showed her to a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment back in Charlotte, Marlowe found herself wondering what exactly she'd gotten herself into, and why, despite everything, she was looking forward to finding out. The first night was a test of wills that neither of them acknowledged. Marlowe had settled into her suite, a bedroom, sitting area, and private bathroom that felt more like a luxury hotel than employee quarters. Jean had left her with a detailed schedule of Thaddeus's routine, medication times, and a list of emergency contacts that was surprisingly short for a man who clearly had resources. At 11 p.m., she made her way to his study for the first night shift, carrying a small bag with her nursing supplies and a thermos of chamomile tea her mother had always sworn by for settling nerves. She found him exactly where she'd left him hours earlier, still staring out at the mountain landscape that was now invisible in the darkness. The only light came from a desk lamp that cast harsh shadows across his face. You're punctual, he said without turning around. It's my job. So is Jean's, but he's been trying to get me to hire night help for 2 years. Thaddeus finally swiveled his chair to face her. What makes you think you'll last longer than the others? Marlowe set her bag down and took the chair across from his desk, the same one she'd sat in during their earlier meeting. Maybe I won't, but I figure we might as well find out. No inspiring speeches about helping people? No promises to make my life better? Would you believe me if I made them? A ghost of a smile crossed his features. No. Then we're starting from the right place. For the next hour, they sat in relative silence. Thaddeus worked on something at his computer, financial reports, from what she could glimpse, while Marlowe familiarized herself with his medical files. The details painted a picture of a man who'd survived something that should have killed him. Multiple surgeries, months of rehabilitation, complications that would have broken most people's spirits entirely. But what struck her most was what wasn't in the files. No mention of family visits, no emergency contacts beyond Jean and his doctors, no evidence that anyone had been with him through the worst of it. Around midnight, she heard his sharp intake of breath. His hand had gone to his lower back, his jaw clenched against what was clearly a wave of pain. When was your last pain medication? She asked quietly. I don't need... That wasn't what I asked. He shot her a look that could have frozen water. This morning. The prescription says every 6 hours as needed. I don't like how they make me feel. Marlowe nodded, understanding more than he probably realized. The fog, like you're watching your life through thick glass. Thaddeus's fingers stilled on his keyboard. Something like that. She stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the darkness where she knew the mountains waited. My grandmother had chronic pain for the last 10 years of her life. Arthritis so bad she could barely hold a coffee cup some days. She refused to take anything stronger than aspirin because she said she'd rather hurt and be present than be comfortable and gone. Smart woman. Stubborn woman. There's a difference. Marlowe turned back to face him. She died in agony because she was too proud to ask for help. The words hung in the air between them. Thaddeus's expression had gone carefully blank, the look of someone who'd had this conversation before and didn't intend to have it again. "I'll take something if it gets unbearable," he said finally. "And who decides what unbearable means?" "I do." She nodded and returned to her chair. "Fair enough. But if you're going to suffer in silence, at least suffer comfortably." Before he could ask what she meant, she'd moved behind his chair. "May I?" He tensed immediately. "What are you doing?" "Trying to help with the muscle tension. Unless you'd prefer I sit here and watch you grimace for the next 6 hours." For a moment, she thought he'd refuse. Then his shoulders dropped slightly. Just don't talk while you do it." Marlo placed her hands carefully on his shoulders, feeling the knots of tension that had probably been building for months. She worked slowly, professionally, the way she'd learned during her brief rotation in physical therapy. Under her hands, she felt some of the rigidity begin to ease. "Better?" she asked after several minutes. "Don't let it go to your head." But his voice had lost some of its sharp edge, and when she returned to her chair, she caught him rolling his shoulders experimentally. They fell back into silence, but it felt different now, less like a standoff and more like a truce. Around 2 a.m., Thaddeus closed his laptop and rubbed his eyes. "You should get some sleep," Marlo said. "Should I?" "It's a suggestion, not an order." He studied her for a moment. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who would try to save me." Marlo met his gaze steadily. "I can't save you. Nobody can save you but you." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, maybe, or recognition. "Then what exactly are you here for?" "To make sure you don't accidentally kill yourself while you figure out whether you want to live." The bluntness of it seemed to catch him off guard. For the first time since she'd arrived, Thaddeus Knox looked genuinely surprised. "That's remarkably honest. I find it saves time." He was quiet for a long moment, and she wondered if she'd pushed too far too fast. Then he moved his wheelchair back from the desk. "I suppose I should get some rest. Jean will have my head if I'm impossible to deal with tomorrow. More impossible than usual. Don't push your luck, Ms. Sinclair." But there was something almost like warmth in his voice as he said it. As she watched him navigate toward the door with fluid precision, Marlo realized she'd just passed some kind of test she hadn't known she was taking. Whether that was a good thing or a dangerous thing remained to be seen. What she did know was that Thaddeus Knox was nothing like the broken man she'd expected to find. He was angry, yes. Guarded, absolutely. But broken, no. He was something far more complex. A man who'd learned to build walls so high that even he'd forgotten how to see over them. And for reasons she couldn't quite explain, that made her want to stick around long enough to see what was on the other side. 3 weeks into her stay, Marlo discovered that Thaddeus Knox was a creature of rigid habits. Every morning at exactly 7 a.m., Jean would wheel a breakfast tray to his study. By 8, Thaddeus would be on video calls with investors or partners in his tech company, something involving artificial intelligence that she didn't pretend to understand. Lunch at noon, more work until 6, dinner alone in the dining room, while staring at financial reports. And every night at 11 p.m., he'd be waiting in his study when she arrived for her shift. What surprised her was how much she'd begun to look forward to those quiet hours. Thaddeus had stopped pretending to work around midnight, and instead they'd fallen into an unexpected routine of watching old movies on the massive television mounted on his wall. Nothing recent or cheerful, classic noir films, mostly, where everyone was doomed from the first scene. "You have depressing taste in entertainment," she'd commented the previous night as they watched The Third Man, for what she suspected was the 100th time. "I find it honest," he'd replied. "At least when characters are miserable in these films, they admit it." Tonight felt different, though. Marlo had been battling morning sickness that seemed determined to last all day, and the baby, now at 13 weeks, was making its presence known in ways that were becoming harder to hide. She'd taken to wearing looser scrubs, but sooner or later, someone was going to notice. She found Thaddeus in his usual spot, but instead of his laptop, he had a chess set laid out on the desk. "Do you play?" he asked without preamble. "A little. My mother taught me when I was young." "Good. I'm tired of beating Jean." They arranged themselves on opposite sides of the desk, Marlo taking the white pieces. As she moved her first pawn, she became acutely aware of how closely he was watching her. Not the board, but her face. "You look tired," he observed. "Thanks. You really know how to make a girl feel special." "I'm serious. Are you sleeping during the day? Marlo moved her night, trying to focus on the game instead of the way his dark eyes seemed to see everything. Some. Enough. That's not an answer. She looked up to find him studying her with the same intensity he'd shown during their first meeting. But now she recognized it for what it was. Not cruelty, but a sharp intelligence that missed very little. I'm fine, Thaddeus. When did you start calling me that? The question caught her off guard. She'd been thinking of him as Thaddeus for days now, but she hadn't realized she'd started saying it aloud. Would you prefer Mr. Knox? No. He moved his bishop with quick precision. I just noticed. They played in comfortable silence for several minutes. Thaddeus was a good player. Strategic, patient, always thinking several moves ahead. But Marlo had learned his patterns over the past weeks, and she managed to surprise him by taking his rook with a move he clearly hadn't anticipated. Interesting, he murmured, leaning back in his chair. What is? You're not who I thought you were. Who did you think I was? He considered this, absently moving a pawn, someone who would pity me, or try to fix me, or at least pretend that my situation wasn't exactly as hopeless as it appears. And instead you treat me like I'm exactly what I am, a difficult man in an impossible situation who doesn't particularly want to be helped. Marlo moved her queen into position. Checkmate. Thaddeus stared at the board for a long moment, then laughed. A real laugh this time, not the bitter sound she'd heard before. Eugene is going to be insufferable when he finds out you beat me. Who says he has to find out? Their eyes met across the board, and something passed between them, an understanding, maybe, or the beginning of trust. Marlo felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with the baby, and everything to do with the way Thaddeus was looking at her. Another game, he asked. Actually, she stood up, suddenly feeling dizzy. I should check your medications. Make sure everything's stocked for... The room tilted sideways. Marlo gripped the edge of the desk, trying to steady herself, but her vision was going gray around the edges. Marlo, she heard Thaddeus's voice, as if from a great distance, and then she was sitting on the floor with no memory of how she'd gotten there. He was beside her somehow. He'd moved his wheelchair around the desk faster than should have been possible. Easy, he said, his hand on her shoulder. Just breathe. I'm fine, I just stood up too fast. When was the last time you ate? She tried to remember. Breakfast had been impossible because of the nausea. Lunch had been a few crackers. This morning, Marlo, his voice had gone very quiet. Look at me. She raised her eyes to meet his, and saw that he knew. Somehow, impossible as it seemed, he'd figured it out. You're pregnant. It wasn't a question. Marlo felt her carefully constructed walls crumble all at once. Yes. How far along? 13 weeks. Thaddeus was silent for a long moment, his hand still warm on her shoulder. The father? Not in the picture. She waited for judgment, for questions, for the inevitable lecture about her situation. Instead, he simply nodded. Can you stand? With his help, she made it back to her chair. Thaddeus disappeared for a few minutes and returned with a glass of water and what looked like half a sandwich. Jean always makes too much dinner, he said by way of explanation. Thaddeus, I eat. She took a small bite, surprised by how good it tasted. Are you going to fire me? Why would I fire you? Because I didn't tell you. Because I might not be able to do the job much longer. Because you're human. He moved his chair closer, his expression serious. Marlo, I don't care about your personal situation. I care whether you can do what I need you to do. Can you? Yes? For now. Then we'll deal with later, when it becomes now. The simplicity of it, his acceptance, his matter-of-fact response, nearly undid her. She'd been bracing for rejection for so long that kindness felt foreign. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. Gene's going to want to baby-proof the entire house when he finds out. Despite everything, Marlo laughed. You're going to tell him. I'm going to suggest you tell him, soon, before he figures it out himself and feels insulted that we kept it from him. As she finished the sandwich, Marlo realized that something fundamental had shifted between them. The careful boundaries they'd maintained for 3 weeks had dissolved in the space of a dizzy spell and a shared secret, and for the first time since she'd seen those 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test, she didn't feel completely alone. One more game, Thaddeus asked, already resetting the chess pieces. You're just trying to get your dignity back. Absolutely. But as they arranged the pieces for another round, Marlo caught him glancing at her with something that looked suspiciously like protectiveness. and she realized that somewhere in the past 3 weeks, without either of them noticing, they'd stopped being employer and employee. What they were becoming instead was a question neither of them was quite ready to answer. Jean took the news about as well as Marlowe had expected, which is to say, he immediately launched into protective mode. How far along? Was his first question, after she'd told him the following morning in the kitchen. 14 weeks yesterday. Morning sickness? Getting better? Prenatal vitamins? Jean. Thaddeus's voice cut through the interrogation as he wheeled into the kitchen. She's pregnant. Not critically injured. Have you found a doctor here yet? Jean continued, ignoring his employer's comment. Because Dr. Hammond in town is excellent. Delivered half the babies in the county, and there's a good hospital in Denver if... I'll look into it, Marlowe said, touched by his concern despite feeling overwhelmed. You'll do more than look into it. Jean was already reaching for his phone. I'm calling Dr. Hammond's office today. After Jean bustled out of the kitchen, muttering about prenatal care and proper nutrition, Thaddeus poured himself coffee and looked at Marlowe with something that might have been amusement. I warned you he'd want to baby-proof the house. He's sweet. He's a former Army medic who thinks everyone needs a battle plan for everything. Thaddeus sipped his coffee, though in this case he's probably right. Over the next few days, Marlowe discovered that having her secret out in the open changed the dynamic of the entire house. Jean appeared at random intervals with healthy snacks and pregnancy books he'd ordered online. Thaddeus, meanwhile, seemed to be observing her with new eyes, not invasive, but watchful in a way that made her feel both protected and slightly self-conscious. It was during her 4th week there that she found him in the kitchen at 2 a.m., standing at the counter with his back to her. Couldn't sleep, she asked. He turned, and she saw he was making tea. 2 cups, she realized with surprise. Physical therapy ran late today. Sometimes the muscles don't want to settle down afterward. He handed her one of the cups. Chamomile. Jean says it's good for pregnant women. Jean's been doing research, hasn't he? Jean's been driving me insane with research. But Thaddeus's tone was fond. Did you know that you should avoid soft cheeses? And that you need to sleep on your left side after 20 weeks? I'm learning. Marlowe accepted the tea gratefully. The kitchen felt different at this hour, warmer somehow, more intimate than the formal spaces where they usually spent time. Can I ask you something? Thaddeus leaned against the counter, his expression serious. Of course. What made you decide to keep the baby? The question hung between them. More personal than anything he'd asked before. Marlowe wrapped her hands around the warm mug, gathering her thoughts. I don't know if it was really a decision, she said finally. More like, the moment I saw those test results, I knew. Even though everything was falling apart, even though I was terrified, there was this voice that said, this is happening, and you're going to figure it out. And the father, he really just left? He made it clear that a baby didn't fit into his travel schedule. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. I think he was relieved when I didn't fight him on it. Thaddeus was quiet for a moment. His loss. The simple words, spoken without drama or false comfort, somehow meant more than any elaborate speech would have. What about you? She asked. Did you ever want kids? Something shuddered in his expression, and she immediately regretted the question. Before the accident, maybe. It seemed like something that might happen eventually. He stared into his tea. After. It didn't seem fair to saddle anyone with this version of me. This version of you isn't so bad. He looked up, meeting her eyes. You say that now? I say that after living with you for a month. Trust me, if you were unbearable, I'd have figured it out by now. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Jean might disagree. Jean loves you like a son and you know it. Jean has questionable judgment. They finished their tea in comfortable silence, and when Marlowe stood to rinse her cup, she felt Thaddeus watching her. Marlowe? If you need anything, for the baby, for yourself, you'll tell me, won't you? She turned to face him, struck by the unexpected vulnerability in his voice. Thaddeus, you're already doing more than enough. The job, the health insurance, letting me stay here. That's not what I meant. The intensity in his dark eyes made her breath catch. Then what did you mean? I meant, he seemed to struggle with the words. I meant that you don't have to do this alone. Not while you're here. The offer hung between them. Loaded with implications neither of them seemed ready to examine too closely. Marlowe felt that flutter in her stomach again. The one that had nothing to do with the baby and everything to do with the way this difficult, guarded man was looking at her like she mattered. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen Jean's list of baby-related home improvements. But as they made their way back through the quiet house, Thaddeus to his downstairs bedroom, Marlo to her suite upstairs, she found herself thinking about his words. You don't have to do this alone. She'd been alone for so long that the idea of partnership, even temporary partnership, felt both thrilling and terrifying. And the fact that it was coming from Thaddeus Knox, a man who'd built his entire life around isolation, made it even more complicated. In her room, she stood at the window looking out at the mountain landscape bathed in moonlight. Somewhere out there was the life she'd left behind, the failed relationship, the lost job, the uncertain future. But here, in this house that had felt like a fortress just weeks ago, she was beginning to understand what safety might feel like. The baby kicked for the first time that night, a tiny flutter that made her press her hand to her stomach in wonder. "What do you think, little one?" she whispered. "Think we might have found something good here?" The baby, of course, didn't answer, but as Marlo drifted off to sleep, she could have sworn she felt something that might have been contentment settling around her like a warm blanket. And in the morning, when she found a pregnancy book on her nightstand, one that Jean definitely hadn't left there, she realized that some walls weren't just cracking, they were falling down entirely. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Marlo was helping Jean reorganize the pantry to accommodate what he called proper pregnancy nutrition. Her phone buzzed against the kitchen counter, and she glanced at the screen to see her mother's name. Delia Sinclair had impeccable timing, always calling at the exact moment when Marlo felt like her life might finally be stabilizing. "Mama," she answered, accepting the FaceTime call before she could second-guess herself. Her mother's face filled the screen, still beautiful at 52, with the same green eyes and blonde hair that Marlo had inherited. Though Delia's was now streaked with silver, she refused to color. "There's my baby girl." Delia's southern drawl was warm but sharp. "Lord, honey, you look different. Are you eating enough? You seem thinner." "I'm fine, Mama. Just tired." "Tired from what? That fancy job you took up in Colorado?" Delia's eyes narrowed slightly. "You still haven't told me exactly what you're doing up there." Marlo glanced at Jean, who was tactfully arranging canned goods while pretending not to listen. "I'm working as a private caregiver." "For who?" "An older gentleman who needs assistance." It wasn't technically a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Thaddeus was older than her, just not in the way her mother would assume. "Well, that's all well and good. But honey, I've been thinking. You've been gone 6 weeks now, and I miss you something fierce. Maybe it's time you came home." Marlo's stomach clenched. "Mama, I know what you're going to say, but listen to me. Francine Patterson's daughter just got hired at the new medical center in Columbia. Good benefits, nice hours. I could put in a word. I have a job. Taking care of some stranger in the middle of nowhere isn't a real life, Marlo Grace." Delia's voice took on the tone that had made teenage Marlo want to hide under her bed. "You need to be around family, around people who love you." The words hit harder than they should have. Marlo found herself thinking about the quiet evenings with Thaddeus, the way Jean fussed over her prenatal vitamins, the surprising sense of belonging she'd found in this house. "I am around people who care about me," she said quietly. "Honey, they're paying you to be there. That's different." Before Marlo could respond, Thaddeus appeared in the kitchen doorway. He took one look at her face and immediately understood that something was wrong. "Everything okay?" he asked. Delia's voice carried clearly through the phone. "Who is that?" Marlo's heart sank. Her mother had ears like a hawk and the persistence of a bloodhound when it came to men in her daughter's life. "That's my employer," Marlo said, shooting Thaddeus a warning look. "Well, let me see him. I want to know who my daughter's working for." "Mama, that's not—" But Thaddeus was already moving his wheelchair closer, apparently deciding to handle this head-on. "Good morning, Mrs. Sinclair. I'm Thaddeus Knox." Marlo watched her mother's expression change as she took in Thaddeus's appearance. The expensive clothes, the obvious wealth, and most importantly, the fact that he was definitely not the elderly gentleman she'd been imagining. Delia said, her voice taking on a deceptively sweet tone. "You're much younger than I expected." "I'm 34, Thaddeus replied calmly. "And you need a caregiver because—" "Mama," Marlo's voice carried a warning. "It's all right," Thaddeus said. "I'm paralyzed from the waist down, Mrs. Sinclair. Your daughter helps ensure I don't accidentally hurt myself during the night." Delia's expression softened slightly, but her protective instincts were clearly on high alert. "I see. And you live alone?" "With my household manager, Jean." This is a large house, and we felt it was appropriate to have medical assistance available. Jean chose that moment to appear in the frame, giving a small wave. Pleasure to meet you, ma'am. Your daughter's been a godsend around here. Marlo could see her mother's mind working, cataloging details and filing them away for future interrogation. Well, Delia said finally, it sounds like Marlo's in good hands. But honey, I still think you should consider coming home, at least for a visit. After they hung up, with promises from Marlo to think about a visit, the kitchen fell into uncomfortable silence. Your mother seems protective, Thaddeus observed. That's one word for it. Marlo sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. She means well, but she thinks I'm making a mistake being here. Are you? The question was quiet, but it carried weight. Marlo looked up to find Thaddeus watching her with an unreadable expression. I don't know, she admitted. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just hiding. From what? From making real decisions about my life, about the baby's future. Jean cleared his throat. If I may say something. They both turned to him. I've been watching you for 6 weeks now, he said, addressing Marlo. And in that time, I've seen you handle medical emergencies, manage this one's moods. He gestured at Thaddeus. Adapt to a completely new environment, and somehow make this house feel more like a home than it has in years. That doesn't sound like hiding to me. That sounds like living. Marlo felt tears prick her eyes. Jean, I'm not finished. His voice was gentle but firm. I've also watched you bloom here. You're stronger than when you arrived, happier. And that baby you're carrying, it's going to be born into a world where its mother knows her own worth. Thaddeus was staring at Jean like he'd never seen him before. When did you become a philosopher? About the same time you stopped being a complete ass to people who are trying to help you. Despite everything, Marlo laughed. You two are impossible. Her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and felt her blood turn cold. Hey Marlo, Devin here. Heard through some friends that you disappeared to Colorado. Need to talk. Call me. The phone slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering onto the kitchen table. Marlo! Thaddeus's voice seemed to come from very far away. She stared at the message, her mind racing. How had Devin found out where she was? What did he want? And why now? Just when she was starting to feel like she belonged somewhere. It's him, she whispered. The baby's father. He wants to talk. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Thaddeus's expression went carefully blank, the same look he'd worn during their first meeting. What are you going to do? He asked. Marlo looked around the kitchen, at Jean's worried face, at Thaddeus's controlled stillness, at the evidence of the life she'd been building here for the past 6 weeks. I don't know, she said, but even as she spoke the words, she could feel the careful peace she'd found beginning to fracture, because the past, it seemed, wasn't quite ready to let her go, and she wasn't sure she was strong enough to fight for the future she'd only just begun to imagine. Marlo stared at Devin's message for 3 days before she found the courage to call him back. She'd carried her phone around the house like a loaded weapon, checking it obsessively while trying to pretend everything was normal. But nothing was normal. Thaddeus had withdrawn into a politeness so careful it felt like ice, and Jean kept shooting worried glances between them like he was watching a slow-motion disaster. Finally, on Friday afternoon, while Thaddeus was in his weekly physical therapy session and Jean was in town getting groceries, she stepped onto the back terrace and dialed Devin's number. He answered on the second ring. Marlo. Thank God. His voice was exactly as she remembered, smooth, confident, with that hint of charm that had first attracted her. I was starting to think you were avoiding me. What do you want, Devin? Straight to the point. I always liked that about you. She could hear him moving around, probably pacing. He'd always been a pacer. Look, I've been thinking a lot since you left Charlotte. About us. About what happened. There is no us. You made that very clear. I was scared, okay? You dropped this bombshell on me and I panicked. But I've had time to think and what? And I made a mistake. A huge mistake. His voice took on the earnest tone that had once made her melt. I want to be part of this, Marlo. Part of the baby's life. Part of your life. Marlo gripped the phone tighter, her free hand instinctively moving to her stomach. At 18 weeks, her bump was becoming impossible to hide, a constant reminder of the life growing inside her. Where were you 3 months ago when I needed you? I was being an idiot, but I'm here now. Are you? Because last I checked, I'm in Colorado and you're still traveling wherever the wind takes you. I took a permanent position in Denver. Started last week. I'm 20 minutes away from you, Marlo. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Denver. He was here, in Colorado. The safe distance she'd put between herself and her old life had just evaporated. How did you even find me? Does it matter? What matters is that I'm here, and I want to make this right. Before Marlo could respond, she heard the sound of Thaddeus's wheelchair on the terrace behind her. She turned to find him watching her with an expression that made her chest tighten. I have to go, she said into the phone. Marlo, wait. Can we meet? Just to talk. I need time to think. Of course. But don't take too long, okay? This baby deserves to have both parents. The line went dead, leaving Marlo staring at her phone with trembling hands. That was him. It wasn't a question. Yes. Thaddeus moved his chair closer, but not too close. The careful distance he'd been maintaining for days felt like an ocean between them. What did he want? To be part of the baby's life. He took a job in Denver. Something flickered across Thaddeus's face. Pain, maybe, or resignation. That's good news. Is it? A child should have both parents, if possible. The words were reasonable, logical, completely correct. They also felt like a knife twisting in her chest. Thaddeus, you don't owe me an explanation, Marlo. Your relationship with him is none of my business. But his voice was too carefully controlled, and she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the arms of his wheelchair. What if I don't want him to be part of this? Then that's your choice to make. And what if I want to stay here? What if I want... She stopped herself before she could finish the sentence, before she could say something that might change everything between them. What if you want what? Marlo looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who'd become her anchor over the past 7 weeks, who made her tea when she couldn't sleep, who'd somehow made her feel like she belonged somewhere for the first time in her life. What if I want things to stay the way they are? For a moment, his careful mask slipped, and she saw something raw and vulnerable in his dark eyes. That's not fair to the baby, he said finally, or to him, or to yourself. What about what's fair to you? I told you before, I'm not part of this equation. Why not? The question hung between them like a challenge. Thaddeus looked away, staring out at the mountains that had witnessed all their late-night conversations, all the small moments that had built something fragile and precious between them. Because I can't give you what you need, he said quietly, and I can't give that baby what it needs. How do you know what I need? Because you deserve someone whole, someone who can be a real partner, a real father figure, someone who can what? Walk. The anger in her voice surprised them both. Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? You've decided that because you're in a wheelchair, you're somehow less than. Marlo. No. She moved closer, close enough to see the pain he was trying so hard to hide. You want to know what I need. I need someone who cares enough to make me tea at 2 in the morning. Someone who watches terrible movies with me and lets me win at chess sometimes. Someone who sees me, really sees me, and doesn't run away. That's not enough. It is for me. They stared at each other, the weight of unspoken feelings pressing down like the thin mountain air. Finally, Thaddeus looked away. Your mother's right, he said. You should go home. Figure out what you really want without complications. The word hit her like a physical blow. Complications. After everything they'd shared, everything that had grown between them, that's what she was to him. Fine, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe I will. She turned and walked back into the house, leaving Thaddeus alone on the terrace. In her room, she sat on the edge of the bed and pressed both hands to her stomach, feeling the baby's gentle movements. Her phone buzzed with another text from Devin. There's a great Italian place downtown. Tomorrow night. We have a lot to talk about. Marlo stared at the message until the words blurred together. She thought about Devin's easy charm, his promises to make things right. She thought about her mother's worried voice, insisting she come home where she belonged. And then she thought about Thaddeus, sitting alone on the terrace, convinced that he wasn't enough. The baby kicked, hard enough to make her gasp, as if it was trying to tell her something. What do you think, little one? She whispered. What are we supposed to do? But this time, the baby's answer felt perfectly clear. She picked up her phone and typed a response to Devin. Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. Send me the address. Because maybe Thaddeus was right. Maybe she needed to figure out what she really wanted, even if it broke her heart in the process. The Italian restaurant was everything Devin had promised. Dimly lit, intimate, the kind of place where couples went to rekindle romance or make important decisions about their future. Marlowe sat across from him in a corner booth, studying the man who had once made her heart race. He looked exactly the same. Sandy hair, easy smile, clothes that spoke of someone who'd never worried about money. But something was different. Or maybe she was different. "You look incredible," he said, reaching across the table to touch her hand. "Pregnancy suits you." She pulled her hand back gently. "Thank you. I mean it. You're glowing." His eyes dropped to her visible bump, and for a moment, something that might have been wonder crossed his face. "It's really happening, isn't it? We're going to have a baby. I'm going to have a baby," she corrected quietly. "Where you fit into that picture is still up for discussion." Devin leaned back, his expression becoming more serious. "Fair enough. I know I have a lot of making up to do." "Do you?" "Because I'm not sure there's anything to make up for, Devin. You were honest about what you wanted. I can't fault you for that. But I was wrong about what I wanted." He leaned forward again, his voice taking on the earnest tone she remembered. "I thought I wanted freedom, adventure, no strings attached. But these past few months, all I could think about was you. About us. About the family we could be." Marlowe sipped her water, buying time while she tried to organize her thoughts. "What changed your mind? You want the honest truth?" "Always. I couldn't stop thinking about my father." Devin's hands fidgeted with his napkin. "He left when I was 8. Just disappeared one day. My mom raised me alone and I watched her struggle for years. I swore I'd never do that to someone. But you did do that to someone. You did it to me." The words hung between them, and she saw him flinch. "You're right. I did. But I'm here now, trying to make it right." Their server appeared to take their orders, and Marlowe found herself ordering pasta she didn't really want while her mind raced. This was what she'd thought she wanted when she first discovered the pregnancy. Devin stepping up, taking responsibility, wanting to be part of their child's life. So why did it feel so wrong? "Tell me about Colorado," Devin said after their food arrived. "What's it like living up there in the mountains?" "Peaceful, quiet." She paused, thinking about the house that had become home, about Jean's protective fussing and Thaddeus's dry humor. Different from anything I expected. "And your employer, he seems intense." Something in Devin's tone made her look up sharply. "He's a good man. I'm sure he is. It's just, when I saw him on that video call, I got the impression there might be something more than just a working relationship." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Come on, Marlowe. I saw the way he looked at you, and the way you looked at him." Heat flooded her cheeks. "You're imagining things." "Am I?" Devin set down his fork, his expression becoming more serious. "Because if there's something I should know about, now would be the time to tell me." Marlowe stared at her untouched pasta, her mind filling with images of Thaddeus, the way he'd looked when she'd beaten him at chess, the gentleness in his voice when he'd offered to help with the baby, the pain in his eyes when he'd called himself a complication. "There's nothing to tell," she said finally. But even as she spoke the words, she knew they were a lie. "Good," Devin said, reaching for her hand again. "Because I have something I want to ask you." This time she didn't pull away, though his touch felt foreign against her skin. "Marlowe, I know I messed up. I know I have no right to ask this, but I want us to try again. I want us to be a family. Devin, I've got a good job now, a steady income. I've been looking at apartments in Denver, places with good schools nearby. We could make this work." She looked into his eyes, blue eyes that had once made her feel desired, and tried to imagine the life he was describing. Suburban domesticity, shared parenting duties, the kind of conventional happiness that should have been everything she wanted. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course, but don't take too long, okay? The baby will be here before we know it." They finished dinner in relative quiet, Devin filling the silence with stories about his new job and his plans for the future. All reasonable, all practical, all perfectly logical, and all completely wrong. The realization hit her as they stood outside the restaurant, Denver's city lights twinkling around them. Devin leaned in to kiss her goodbye, a soft, familiar kiss that should have stirred something in her. Instead, all she could think about was Thaddeus. "I'll call you in a few days," Devin said. "Okay." She drove back up the mountain in a daze, her mind churning with confusion and guilt. Devin was offering her everything she'd thought she wanted: partnership, security, a traditional family for her child. So why did the idea of accepting his offer make her feel like she was suffocating? The house was dark when she arrived, except for a light in Thaddeus's study. She found him there, staring out at the mountains, a untouched cup of coffee growing cold on his desk. "How did it go?" he asked without turning around. "Fine. Just fine." Marlowe moved to the window beside him, looking out at the same view that had become as familiar as breathing. "He wants us to try again. To be a family." Thaddeus nodded slowly. "That's what you wanted. Is it? Isn't it?" She turned to face him, studying his profile in the lamplight. "I thought it was. But sitting there tonight, listening to him talk about apartments and schools and the future he's planned for us, all I could think about was coming home. This isn't your home, Marlowe. Isn't it?" She moved closer to his chair. "Because it feels like home. It feels like the first place I've ever belonged. You belong with people who can give you what you need. Stop telling me what I need." The words burst out of her with surprising force. "You don't get to decide what's best for me, Thaddeus, I do." Finally, he turned to look at her, and she saw that his careful mask had cracked. There was raw pain in his dark eyes, and something else. Something that looked like hope fighting against despair. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when Devin kissed me tonight, all I could think about was you. I'm saying that the only future I can imagine is one where I'm here with you, raising this baby in this house with Jean fussing over all of us. Marlowe, I'm saying I love you." The words hung in the air between them, simple and terrifying and true. Thaddeus stared at her for a long moment, and she saw the exact moment when his walls finally, completely crumbled. "God help me," he whispered. "I love you too." And then she was in his arms, and he was holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world, and she finally understood what home was supposed to feel like. 3 weeks later, Marlowe's water broke at 2 a.m. during the worst snowstorm Colorado had seen in a decade. She woke to a warm wetness, and the realization that the cramping she'd been feeling all evening wasn't just Braxton Hicks contractions. At 36 weeks, the baby had decided it was time to make its entrance into the world, regardless of weather conditions or hospital accessibility. "Thaddeus," she called, trying to keep the panic out of her voice as another contraction gripped her. "Thaddeus." He appeared in her doorway within seconds, his hair disheveled from sleep, but his eyes instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "The baby's coming." She watched his face go pale in the lamplight. Now, right now, the next few minutes were a blur of controlled chaos. Jean appeared as if summoned by some sixth sense, immediately taking charge of the situation with military precision. Phone calls to Dr. Hammond, to the hospital, to the emergency services. But the news was all bad. The storm had knocked out power lines and made the mountain roads impassable. The ambulance couldn't reach them, and they couldn't get down to the hospital. "How far apart are the contractions?" Dr. Hammond's voice crackled through the phone's speaker. "About 5 minutes," Marlowe gasped, gripping Thaddeus's hand as another wave of pain crashed over her. "And this is her first baby?" "Yes," Jean answered. "Okay, listen carefully. First labors usually take time, but we need to be prepared for anything. I'm going to walk you through what to do." For the next hour, their fortress on the mountain became a makeshift delivery room. Jean, with his medical training, became the impromptu midwife. Thaddeus never left Marlowe's side, his hand steady in hers, his voice calm and reassuring even though she could see the fear in his eyes. "I can't do this," she whispered, during a brief respite between contractions. "It's too early. What if something's wrong?" "Hey." Thaddeus moved his wheelchair closer to the bed, his face level with hers. "Look at me." She met his dark eyes, finding an anchor in their steadiness. "You are the strongest person I know," he said quietly. "You drove across the country pregnant and alone. You walked into this house and somehow made it a home. You made me believe in love again, when I thought that part of me was dead. Thaddeus, you can do this, Marlowe. We can do this. Together." Another contraction hit, stronger than the others, and suddenly Dr. Hammond's voice was urgent through the phone. "I can see the head. Jean, support the shoulders. That's it. One more push, Marlowe." With Thaddeus holding her hand and whispering encouragement, Marlowe gave everything she had to bringing their child into the world, because somewhere in the past months, that's what this baby had become. Not just hers, but theirs. At 4:17 a.m., as the storm finally began to quiet outside, their daughter was born. She was tiny but perfect, with a strong cry that filled the room with the most beautiful sound Marlowe had ever heard. Jean cleaned her carefully and placed her on Marlowe's chest, where she immediately quieted, as if she recognized the heartbeat she'd been listening to for 9 months. "She's beautiful," Thaddeus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Marlo looked down at the tiny face and bore, at the dark hair that looked exactly like Thaddeus's, and felt her heart expand to accommodate a love she'd never imagined possible. "Would you like to hold her?" she asked. For a moment, Thaddeus hesitated. What if I drop her?" "You won't drop her." With infinite care, Marlo placed the baby in Thaddeus's arms. The sight of this strong man, who'd convinced himself he had nothing to offer, cradling their daughter with such tender reverence, brought tears to her eyes. "Hello, little one," he murmured, his finger tracing the baby's tiny cheek. I'm going to take care of you, both of you." The baby opened her eyes, dark brown, like her father's, and seemed to study his face with solemn intensity. "I think she knows you," Marlo said softly. "She should. I've been talking to her for months." It was true. Marlo had often caught him murmuring to her belly during quiet moments, telling the baby about the mountains, about the books he loved, about the world she would inherit. Jean cleared his throat from the doorway. "Dr. Hammond wants to know if you've chosen a name." Marlo and Thaddeus looked at each other, and she saw him understand that this was her decision to make. "Luna," she said finally. "Luna Grace Knox." Thaddeus's eyes filled with tears. "Knox, if you'll have us." Instead of answering with words, he leaned forward and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promises for the future they would build together. A week later, when the roads were clear and they finally made it to the hospital for Luna's checkup, Dr. Hammond pronounced her perfectly healthy despite her early arrival. "She's a strong one," he said, smiling as Luna gripped his finger with surprising force. "Takes after her parents, I'd say." In the parking lot afterward, Marlo secured Luna in her car seat while Thaddeus watched with the careful attention of someone still amazed by his own happiness. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "About us? About me being her father?" Marlo closed the car door and moved to stand beside his wheelchair. "Do you love her? More than my own life. Do you love me? Beyond reason. Then you're not a being, her father, Thaddeus. You are her father. Biology doesn't make a family. Love does." As they drove home, all three of them together, Marlo thought about the journey that had brought them here, the pregnancy test that had changed everything, the job posting that had seemed like desperation but turned out to be destiny, the walls that had come down brick by brick until love could finally find a way in. Luna made a soft sound from her car seat, and Thaddeus immediately looked back to check on her, his face filled with the fierce protectiveness of a man who'd finally found something worth fighting for. And Marlo knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them the same way they'd faced her unexpected labor, together, with courage, and with the kind of love that could turn a fortress into a home. The baby she'd been so afraid to have alone would never be alone. None of them would be. 2 years later, the sound of tiny feet running across hardwood floors had become the heartbeat of the house. Marlo stood at the kitchen window, watching Thaddeus push Luna's swing on the back terrace while the 2-year-old squealed with delight. Her dark curls caught the Colorado sunshine, and her laughter carried on the mountain breeze like music. "Higher, Daddy, higher. Any higher and you'll be visiting the birds," Thaddeus called back, but he gave the swing another gentle push. Luna had been calling him Daddy since she first learned to talk, as naturally as breathing. There had never been a conversation about it, never a moment of uncertainty. From the day she was born in that snowstorm, Thaddeus Knox had been her father in every way that mattered. "Mrs. Knox?" Jean appeared in the kitchen doorway, carrying a vase of fresh flowers from the garden he'd insisted on planting last spring. "The photographers will be here in an hour for the magazine shoot." Marlo still smiled every time someone called her Mrs. Knox. They'd married quietly 6 months after Luna's birth, with only Jean and Dr. Hammond as witnesses. Nothing fancy. Just 2 people promising to love each other for the rest of their lives, while their daughter slept peacefully in Jean's arms. "How do I look?" she asked, smoothing down her simple blue dress. "Like a woman who's exactly where she belongs," Jean said with characteristic honesty. The magazine feature had been Thaddeus's idea, a story about their adaptive technology company that had grown from his personal needs into a business that helped thousands of people with disabilities live more independent lives. But Marlo suspected the real reason he'd agreed to the interview was to show the world that families came in all shapes and sizes, and that love was the only qualification that truly mattered. "Mama," Luna's voice carried through the open terrace doors. "Come swing." "In a minute, sweetheart," Marlo called back. She walked out to the terrace and where Thaddeus was lifting Luna out of the swing. Their daughter immediately launched into an elaborate story about the butterfly she'd seen, gesturing wildly with her small hands. "It was this big, Daddy, and it was purple and yellow, and it landed right on my nose." "On your nose." Thaddeus made an exaggerated, surprised face. "Are you sure it wasn't a tiny dragon?" "Daddy," Luna giggled, "it was a butterfly." Watching them together, Marlo felt the same surge of gratitude that hit her multiple times a day. This life they'd built, chaotic and beautiful and completely unexpected, was more than she'd ever dared to dream. Luna spotted her and ran over, arms raised for a hug. "Mama, did you see my butterfly?" "I heard all about it," Marlo said, scooping her daughter up. "Maybe we can look for more butterflies after the nice people leave." "What nice people?" "Some people want to take pictures of Daddy's work," Thaddeus explained. "They want to tell other people about the machines that help people like me." Luna considered this seriously. "Will they want to take pictures of me?" "Probably," Marlo said. "Is that okay?" "Only if I can wear my princess dress." An hour later, the photographers had transformed their living room into a professional studio. Marlo watched from the kitchen as they captured Thaddeus in his element, confident, articulate, passionate about the work that had given him purpose beyond his own healing. But her favorite shots were the candid ones, Thaddeus and Luna building block towers on the floor, his face soft with concentration as he listened to her chatter, Luna helping him at his computer, her small hands hovering over the keyboard while he guided her fingers to spell her name. "This is your family?" the lead photographer asked during a break. "Yes," Thaddeus said simply. "You're very lucky." "I know." As the crew packed up their equipment, Marlo found herself thinking about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, terrified, alone, convinced her life was falling apart. If someone had told her then that she'd end up here, married to a man who'd teach their daughter to believe she could do anything, living in a house filled with laughter and love and the kind of security she'd never thought possible, she would never have believed it. Her phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, her heart skipped. Old habits died hard, but it was just her mother. "Saw the photos you sent. Luna looks more like Thaddeus every day. When are you bringing my grandbaby to visit?" Delia had come around eventually, especially after meeting Luna. It was hard to argue with happiness when it was so obvious, and even harder to dislike a man who clearly adored her daughter and granddaughter with equal devotion. As for Devon, he'd tried to contact her a few more times after that dinner in Denver, but eventually the calls had stopped. She'd heard through mutual friends that he'd transferred back to the East Coast. Some people, she'd learned, were meant to be lessons, not lifelong partners. That evening, after Luna was asleep and the house had settled into its familiar nighttime quiet, Marlo found Thaddeus on the terrace where this had all began. He was reading, always reading, but he looked up when she approached. "Good day," he asked. "The best." She settled into the chair beside him, the same one she'd sat in during those first tentative conversations years ago. "What are you reading?" He held up the book, A Guide to Toddler Development. "Research. Luna's been asking about why her friend Harper has a daddy who stands up and walks. I want to make sure I explain it right." Marlo's heart melted all over again. "And what will you tell her?" "That families are like snowflakes. No two are exactly alike, but they're all beautiful in their own way." "That's perfect." "I hope so." He closed the book and reached for her hand. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, that you chose this, that you chose me." "I didn't choose you," Marlo said, intertwining their fingers. "I found you. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Choice implies there were other options, but there weren't. Not really. From the moment I walked into your study and you tried to scare me away, this was inevitable." Thaddeus lifted their joined hands and kissed her knuckles. "Inevitable? Some things are just meant to be. Like Luna deciding to be born during a blizzard. Like Jean turning out to be the world's most devoted grandfather figure. Like you learning that your heart was bigger than your fears." They sat in comfortable silence, looking out at the mountains that had witnessed their entire love story. Somewhere in the house, Jean was probably reading in his room. Upstairs, Luna slept peacefully in the nursery they'd painted together, surrounded by stuffed animals and picture books and all the evidence of a childhood filled with love. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't taken that job posting?" Thaddeus asked. "Never," Marlo said firmly, "because this is where I was always meant to end up. This is where we were always meant to end up." As if in response to her words, they heard a soft cry from upstairs, Luna having one of her brief middle-of-the-night wake-ups. "I'll go," Thaddeus said, but Marlo was already standing. We'll both go. They made their way upstairs together, entering the nursery to find Luna sitting up in her toddler bed, rubbing sleepy eyes. Mama? Daddy? We're here, sweetheart, Marlo whispered, settling on the edge of the bed while Thaddeus positioned his wheelchair beside them. I had a dream about butterflies, Luna mumbled, immediately curling up against Marlo's side. Good butterflies or scary butterflies? Thaddeus asked softly. Good ones. They were dancing. That sounds like a beautiful dream. As Luna drifted back to sleep between them, Marlo caught Thaddeus's eye in the soft glow of the nightlight. In his expression, she saw everything they'd built together. The trust, the love, the unshakable certainty that whatever came next, they would face it as a family. I love you, she mouthed silently. I love you too, he mouthed back. And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet breathing of their sleeping daughter and the solid walls of the home they'd created together, Marlo knew that some stories don't end. They just keep getting better. What would you have done in Marlo's situation? Would you have had the courage to love someone who believed he wasn't enough? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. I thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.